The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, thinking they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
All right, we got a lot of stuff today. It's kind of an odd week because normally we're talking about the next game for the Commanders at this time, and the team gets back on the practice field today. There are news conferences for Ron Rivera and the players, and, we just sort of ramp up to where we're going. Well, it's a season that's been dead for over a week, maybe 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever, and still got 4 games left to go, but there's no game this week, so there are other things to jump into. And as much of a mess as it is here, Jets seem so much worse. Jets are an absolute disaster that seems to get worse by the day with this latest thing with Zach Wilson, the quarterback who I guess they intended to start this week, maybe still will against Houston, but reportedly told teammates, I'm not sure whether I want to get back on the field in these meaningless games because I might get hurt. And then Aaron Rodgers is jumping to his defense in the one place he speaks every week, which is the Pat McAfee show. And, we'll deal with all that Michigas coming up shortly. But there is some breaking news, not from the sports world, but from the entertainment world. Norman Lear has passed away at the age of 101. 101. He changed the face of television. That's not hyperbole. I'll get to more on that in a moment. But there was a documentary that was done, 6, 7 years ago by Carl Reiner, who lived to be 98. And he wanted to do a documentary on his friends who are in his same age group. And the title of the documentary, which I think aired on HBO, was Read the Obits. If you're not in them, have breakfast. And it was all about the positive outlook of his highly successful friends from the television industry, of which he was a pioneer as well. One of them was Betty White, who lived to be 99, almost made it to 100. In fact, she was on the cover of People magazine to celebrate her 100th birthday and died like 2 weeks short of that. Another is Dick Van Dyke, who I think is 97 now. Mel Brooks in the same age range, and Norman Lear, who was the oldest and now has passed away at the age of 101. So Dick Van Dyke and Mel Brooks are still with us, representing an era of entertainment which is long gone, and probably you'd have to be close to 60 years old to remember them in their heyday. But what Norman Lear did for television is just absolutely remarkable, given the time and the place of television when he, I don't want to say he burst on the scene because he had been successful in the entertainment industry before that, but his breakout was with All in the Family in 1971. And it was a show based on an English show. I think it was called Till Death Do Us Part, if I'm not mistaken. I believe that was the name of the show. And, Till Death Do Us Part. It was originally picked up by ABC, and they got nervous about it. I don't know. This is a little bit over the top for 1971. You've got a guy who's sort of a lovable racist here and saying things and talking about things that just didn't exist in television in those days. So CBS took it, and it turned out to be one of the greatest moves they ever made. That became one of the most successful television shows in history. It changed the way that people watch TV. In 1971, there were no VCRs or DVDs or anything like streaming. You either saw it live or you didn't see it. So it was on, I think, at 8 o'clock on Saturday night, and people wouldn't go out until after the show was over. And then they had a monster lineup behind it. One time, MASH was behind All in the Family. They had the Bob Newhart show. Carol Burnett show wrapped things up at 9 o'clock. Mary Tyler Moore was in that murderer's row of television shows. And Norman Lear was the one who made it happen. And there were a bunch of spin-offs off of that, like Maude and others that Sanford and Son was sort of like it. It was a black family based in Los Angeles, not in Queens. But this absolutely made television look different than it had at any other time. And I was fortunate to be a young teenager then, babysitting for my sister. So I watched all these shows every Saturday. I mean, it was great. And we didn't have a remote control, didn't need one, because nobody changed the channel from CBS, from Channel 9. Watched all those shows. And he did other shows like One Day at a Time, which was based on a divorced single mother, Different Strokes, which showed a wealthy businessman with black adopted children. Mary Hartman, that didn't last very long, but it was groundbreaking in the way television was done. And, his success in movies was not quite as great. He did movies like Stand By Me, which I thought was quite good, 1986. The Thief Who Came to Dinner, 1971. Princess Bride, 1987. I think it was more made for television than anything else. And he's from that generation, born in 1922. So he dropped out of Emerson College to enlist in the Air Force in 1942 and served as a radio operator and a gunner on a B-17 bomber in the European theater, flying 52 missions. So he was a war hero before he got into the television business. He started as a press agent, moved to Los Angeles, and moved into comedy writing after partnering with Ed Simmons, who was his cousin's husband. And then they got their first big break writing for Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. I mean, think of all the groundbreaking stuff that they were a part of. But All in the Family is what he will be remembered most for, with Carol O'Connor and Gene Stapleton and Sally Struthers and his good friend Carl Reiner's son, Rob Reiner. And that show collected 22 Emmys, over the course of the run. Carol O'Connor got 4 himself, and that gave us Maude, the Jeffersons, what else did they have? They had Checkin' In with Marla Gibbs. That didn't last very long. Archie Bunker's Place was kind of a hold onto the show after Gene Stapleton left. But the work that he did in the 70s, if you were to study it, you would say that this is the biggest change that television has ever had since it came on the scene, 75 years ago? Something like that, late 1940s, when most people started to get television show sets in their house. And, what he was able to accomplish and continued to accomplish, he was still working right up until the end, right up until he passed away at the age of 101 today, or I guess yesterday. The family announced it today. Just an unbelievable career for Norman Lear, who always wore that signature, like a tennis hat, like a kind of a white floppy hat. And it was like his trademark, like he wore it all the time. And you wondered, what's the deal with that? Well, apparently he had some kind of a scalp condition, which caused him to scratch all the time. So in an effort to cut down on the scratching of his scalp, he wore this hat. And when you think of Norman Lear, even though he really wasn't a television performer, you would see him interviewed many times, and he was, present in the talk shows and things like that. He was always wearing that signature white floppy hat, and that's how you remember the look of Norman Lear. But the work of Norman Lear was absolutely incredible. And rest in peace. What a life. Dead at the age of 101. All right, on to the Commanders. No media availability yesterday, but a couple of things I pulled from the Channel 9 interview that's done by Chick Hernandez every week with Ron Rivera. And Chick does a really good job of exploring things that don't necessarily get covered in the news conference. Like Rivera speaks every Monday to the media. He speaks Wednesday, and I believe he speaks Friday. So the opportunity that Chick has, of course, after the game and then after the media availability on Mondays. And this is about where he is heading into these last 4 games, because it looks like the big move has already been made, that getting rid of Jack Del Rio was enough to keep the angry Wolves at bay. And you hear it every week, and you certainly heard it after this last game where they gave up 45 to the Dolphins. Oh, Ron Rivera's got to go. This is as close, I think, as we're going to get here to Rivera saying he's been assured that he will coach the team through the last 4 games. It was phrased in a way from Chick in which it didn't exactly have to say those words, but it was framed in a way of, let's deal with the season when it's over. Let's not deal with what we have to do while it's going on. And this was what Rivera said.
Going forward, exactly. And so that's what I've tried to do, is just stay focused and try to do the task at hand, and that's get better as a football team.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's about all you can say at this point. You know, I mean, the chance that he stays, even with 4 incredible wins over the last 4 games, minimal. I mean, the search is on, has to be, not officially, but on. And I'll get to what is in the Washington Times today about potential candidates. But this is Rivera on keeping the team together over these last 4. And you're starting to see some fissures. You know, you're starting to see like Terry McLaurin sarcastically talking about not getting any catches on Sunday and saying, well, at least I got to work on my cardio. And he talked about clearing out for other receivers, which is not what he's paid to do. He's paid to catch passes and have the ball thrown to him, not just 3 targets like he had on Sunday. You had Jonathan Allen say on another radio station on Monday that he has 1,000% thought about playing for another team, that, you know, he would like to win here, but if it's going to be a long rebuild, he'd like to play someplace where he can win. Now, he's got 2 years left on his contract. I don't think it's going to be easy to deal him, but, you know, we just saw what they did with Montez Sweat and Chase Young. I don't think it's out of the question that Jonathan Allen could be dealt. So he's one. He hasn't checked out. He's still he's a professional. He's a leader. He's one of the captains, and he said he's not giving up. He's going to do his job. But, you know, you wonder, with them giving up 90 points over the last 2 weeks, you know, is Ron Rivera in fear of some of his guys essentially checking out?
No. Just because if there's one thing I'm going to do, is I'm going to hold them to the standard of being a professional. You know, you're going to play in this league, you've got to do what a professional does, and that's, you've got to continue to work hard. You got to continue to do things that you need to do to give yourself a chance to win the football game. You know, we'll play each one of those games, one game at a time. We'll focus on getting after it in each one of those games and see what happens. You know, the whole period of growth and development, the whole period of going through the process, in my opinion, is over.
Sure.
We're far enough into the season now, obviously with 4 games left to play, that they have to, and it should translate to winning football games or playing much better than we have. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, well, that's about all you can hope for at this point, you know. Playing better, winning games, who knows? I think the most winnable game left on the schedule is against the Jets, which is on the 24th. In the meantime, they have to play the Rams on the road. The Rams have Matt Stafford back. They're playing much better now. That's going to be a difficult game, if not an impossible game to win. And then you're looking at a Jets team, which is a mess, and I'll get to all their Michigas coming up. But here's where they are at 4-8. They've got Houston coming to New York on Sunday. C.J. Stroud is having a heck of a year. He's going to be Rookie of the Year. That may be a difficult game to win with whoever is playing quarterback for the Jets. And then they go to Miami. Forget about that. So the likelihood is the Jets are going to be 4-10, and Washington is going to be 4-10. And it's going to be a 4-10 battle on the 24th. The only intrigue for anybody right now is that going to be the game that Aaron Rodgers returns for? Rodgers, making his weekly appearance yesterday on the Pat McAfee show, sounded like that's not looking as realistic as he hoped it would be a couple of weeks ago, having been back on the practice field and working out, but he's not giving it up. This again, Rodgers yesterday on the Pat McAfee show on his status for possibly coming back on the 24th.
It's the most disappointing thing about the whole rehab process was that there was, you know, the 24th was literally on my mind. I felt like that was, you know, post 14 weeks. Tomorrow's 12 weeks, so 2 more weeks. Yeah, it'd be like 14 and a half weeks. I felt like that was reasonable based on my progress. And, you know, what I did last week in a small circle felt great. I'm not sure what I'm gonna do this week. I'm going to try and get out there tomorrow and Thursday. But, yeah, the 24th was always what I was focused on. But
Commanders,
you never know what can happen. You never know what can happen.
Never know what can happen. But he was using the 24th as a was. 24th was. So is he going to come back for a 4-10 team? Likely 4-10 team that I guess mathematically wouldn't be out. Could you make the playoffs at 7-10? I don't think it's possible, but maybe the math would work out so it's still in play. You still would have 2 games left after Washington. So let's say you win that, you're 5-10, and you win at Cleveland, and then they're home against New England. Oh God, what a game that! New England and the Jets at the end of the season. Wow, and maybe no Aaron Rodgers, or who knows who's playing quarterback for them. Maybe it's Zach Wilson. Who knows? They've already released one of the quarterbacks that they had. So they are down to just a mess right now. And we'll get to more on. Oh, here it is. Tim Boyle was the one who was waived yesterday. So here's what's left on the roster with Aaron Rodgers if somehow he plays. Zach Wilson, who may or may not be trying to beg out of these last games. Trevor Siemian and Brett Rippon. Whew. So I guess they would go with Siemian if Wilson doesn't start against Houston, or maybe it's Brett Rippon, who wasn't signed until yesterday when they got him off the Seahawks practice squad. Quarterback situation, whew, what a mess. What a mess. Now, the question is, what does Rodgers really want to do? Does he want to prove the medical experts are full of it and come back and play the same season he tore his Achilles? Is that his big goal? Or does he want to play it safe and get ready for next year, where who knows who his backup will be, but at the age of 40 is going to try and make another run at it with the Jets. We'll see. All right, we'll get to what Kevin Willard said about his team's miserable shooting as Maryland hosts Penn State tonight, plus some baseball, what Mike Rizzo said at the winter meetings. And 50 years ago today, we had the San Diego Padres. Don't go away. All right, we got Tony coming up at 11 o'clock today, and later this hour, we'll look back on 50 years ago today when the National League owners voted unanimously to approve the move of the San Diego Padres to Washington. We only had to wait 31 more years to get a baseball team. 2 years after the Senators left, it looked like we were getting a National League team here, and then we didn't. It was Lucy pulling the football out from Charlie Brown. A lot of things went into play, and I've got a really good story that was written about this a couple of years ago, about how this all went down 50 years ago. And it's some really interesting twists and turns in it. And we'll get to that. Mike Rizzo speaking at the baseball winter meetings yesterday in Nashville. A couple of thoughts, particularly what he said about Steven Strasburg. I'll get to that shortly. Also, Kevin Willard, who's got Maryland off to a terrible start. They're 4-4. But the 4 wins are against, mid-majors. They got their doors blown off at Indiana last week, and their shooting is beyond belief bad. He's hoping it's going to get better, but they're a quarter of the way into the season. You've played 8 games. What do you play, 30 games in the season? So, things need to turn around quickly because Big Ten play is here. They've already played 1, and they got another one tonight, and then things start really rolling after the first of the year. And he's got some guys who couldn't throw it in the ocean right now. Good story today from Michael Phillips in the Washington Post. Phillips is really good. He was with the Richmond Times-Dispatch for many years, and I don't know what happened, but they got rid of him. I guess it's indicative of where the newspaper business is now. But the Washington Times had an opening. Matthew Paris left. He went to New Orleans, so it looks like Michael Phillips has picked up the beat for the team, and he really does great work. And he's looking at, of course, what's next. We've got 4 more games of the Ron Rivera era, and then Rivera and I would presume the front office will be out. I think the question you might ask is, well, what about Eric Bieniemy? Maybe he becomes head coach. Maybe he even stays as offensive coordinator since he has a contract for next year. Now, the offense is taken a little bit of a tumble recently, so the thought of keeping him is not as hot as it was maybe a few weeks ago, but he's in play here. And what Phillips writes is, there aren't as many lists for general managers, but traditionally teams try to poach a young executive from a team running what is perceived to be a successful operation like the Eagles or the Ravens. Ravens have really done it right. It's amazing that 2 teams located 40 miles apart are like the Cain and Abel of the NFL. Washington, it's ownership, of course, but The Ravens under Steve Bisciotti have had very few missteps. They mishandled the Ray Rice situation, okay, but in terms of running an organization, they're stable. They're like the Steelers, and they have won 2 Super Bowls in the time that Washington has not won 11 games. You know, the last time they won 11 games was 1991, and the Ravens have won a couple of Super Bowls and have been contenders for them many, many times because they know how to run an organization. They draft well. They sign the players who they want to re-sign that they like. They make good trades, like Roquan Smith at the trade deadline last year has been a big addition to their defense, and they're in the mix for the Super Bowl this year. They are. They're one of those teams. So I would go shopping at that store. In fact, I'd take Ozzie Newsome out and say, look, I know you don't want to help an opponent in the NFL, but we're in another conference. You're in the AFC. We're in the NFC. And, you know, just kind of give us an idea of how you go about doing this. I don't think he'd be hesitant to share that. He's not going to give him, you know, all the secrets of what the Ravens do. But that's what you have to do. You have to look at a successful organization, and you have to bring in somebody, and you have to look at their structure, how they do things. And the Ravens have always had that structure. Like, for years you heard, oh, no, nothing happens until it runs through Ozzie Newsome. He runs the show. And they had stability at coach. They've only had 3 coaches since they moved to Baltimore from Cleveland in 95, 96, Ted Marchibroda, Brian Billick, and now John Harbaugh. That's it. That's how the Steelers do business. And that's what you have to get to here after this malaise we've been in here for a quarter of a century. Now, as far as coaches, and this is a name that you're probably going to hear a lot of over the next month or so until they hire somebody. And look, it may be a couple of months before there's a new coach. Rivera will be out presumably the 7th or the 8th of January after they finish up against the Cowboys. And then, you know, how long is it going to be before they get a new coach? Well, there's going to be other teams looking for coaches too, so they're going to be competing for them. But the hot name right now is Ben Johnson. Not the Ben Johnson of Stanizzolo back in the Olympics in, 1992, where he was banned. This is Ben Johnson, who's been an offensive coordinator with the Lions, and he's expected to be the hottest name. But he will have choices, as Phillips points out. Would he rather go to the Chargers, where you do have a quarterback and Justin Herbert? I mean, do you want to do that? Or could he actually want to go for the most money? I don't think it would be a good career move for him to go to Carolina. But what Carolina is now is what Washington was for many years. Like, if you screw up there, it doesn't matter. It's a mulligan. You get a shot someplace else. Like Oakland was that. Norv Turner proved this. Norv Turner was first the head coach in Washington. Then he went to Oakland, got fired there, but two Michigan owners, you know, with Dan Snyder and Al Davis. So he got a third shot with the Chargers, and he did take them to the AFC Championship game. Didn't get them to a Super Bowl, but did a pretty decent job there. Another name, and this is a fresh name because we just saw him on Sunday, Dolphins offensive coordinator Frank Smith. Well, I think if you interview Frank Smith whenever the Dolphins season ends, or whenever you're allowed to do that under the new rules, you ask him, well, how are you able to hang 45 on the defense here? Well, you know, Josh, it wasn't really that hard. We had these really good receivers that we put out there, and we just kind of lit you up. We also had a pick six off your quarterback who still needs some development there. Another name, Jaguars offensive coordinator Press Taylor. He's the brother of Bengals coach Zach Taylor. Is that kind of a Gruden-ish situation? I don't know. We'll see. The Chargers' Kellen Moore. Kellen Moore is a Dallas Cowboys disciple. He was a backup quarterback there to Dak Prescott for a while, and he became the offensive coordinator. And he has gone to the Chargers, so you might hold that against him because this hasn't been the year that people thought, you know, might happen for the Chargers. But he did a really good job in Dallas, and there was some thought at one point that he would be their next head coach. Eric Bieniemy is a name that you might consider, and it was reported by Josina Anderson yesterday, who used to work for ESPN, that Bieniemy is on the radar for the Bears. So, okay, that's a guy at least you talk to. Brian Flores, interesting circumstance. Now, he's still suing the league for what happened to him in Miami for racial discrimination. But Flores, as a defensive coach, has done well. He's now with the Vikings, and, you know, he's got experience. And he probably will get some action and maybe even get a head job. I hesitate on him only because he's a defensive coach. I think the league right now is the ones who are most successful, like Mike McDaniel, who was here last week, are offensive guys. Then you get to kind of the long shot names here. Bill Belichick, yes. This is what Phillips writes. Time for the list's most controversial name. Belichick's days seem to be numbered in New England without Tom Brady. The magic has faded quickly, but nobody will dispute he's still a brilliant football mind. He's about 2 seasons away from catching Don Shula as the NFL's winningest coach. That's the one thing that I would look at there as to why you might not want to hire him as president of football operations or find out if he's still chasing that record. Bill Parcells did this with the Dolphins. That was his last stop. He did not coach there. He was the head of football operations. That's what I think you'd consider Belichick for, not necessarily to coach, or if he agrees to have somebody over him, which I don't see at this point in his career, but if he agrees to have somebody over him as a general manager, you might think about bringing him in. But I would consider him to be a real long shot. Phillips has 3 more candidates to consider. Panthers defensive coordinator Elijah Avero. And he says Avero has experience with Sean McVay and Nathaniel Hackett. So he's running the circles that have largely dictated how the league is moving. Now, he's with the Panthers now, but you have to kind of throw that out with David Tepper, who's clearly the new, not necessarily the Snyder off the field or away from the football operation, but seems to be running his football operation in a similar way. And then these 2 names, and I think these are real long shots. Ohio State coach Ryan Day or Michigan coach Jim Harbaugh. And what Michael Phillips writes is, there are rumors that Day could be on the move, and whispers start annually about this time to where Michigan's Jim Harbaugh will land, though so far he's resisted pro-overtures. For a group looking to make a splash, either would fit the bill. For an ownership group that seems to be interested in innovation and empowering the scouting department, it's hard to see either being the right pick for Washington. Now, Harbaugh did kind of knock on the door with the Vikings and I think got an interview there, didn't get the job, went back to Michigan. But with all the swirl that's going on with Michigan and the 2 suspensions that he served this year, it's hard to see him coming back as the coach there. And I'll tell you this, Jim Harbaugh for the short term is good. The statements that have been made recently by Josh Harris would indicate that that's not the way he's going to go. But for a quick fix, he's successful. He might get you to a Super Bowl. He may not win one, and eventually he flames out. Eventually he has to go. But in terms of what he does when he initially comes onto the job, I mean, the 49ers were a terrible team when he took over. And he got them to the Super Bowl in 2 or 3 years. And he was out after 5 or 6. But, that would be, compared to where they've been, that would be an improvement. I just don't see with Josh Harris preaching patience and the way he's done things with the 76ers that he goes for a quick fix. But I would not be opposed to seeing Jim Harbaugh come here. Ryan Day I don't know enough about other than he can't beat Michigan. And if he can't beat Michigan, I don't know if he can win a big game in the NFL. All right, let's get to the basketball. Maryland playing Penn State tonight at home. That's a 7 o'clock tip. They are 4-4 on the season, which doesn't look that ugly. But they have had some ugly losses during that stretch, including a loss at Villanova. And the last game that they played was last Friday when they played at Indiana, which is a bad shooting team. Indiana does not shoot well. And Maryland lost that game 65-53, and it really wasn't that close. They were just brick city in the first half. They played decent defense in the second half, but they can't shoot. And here are the numbers. Here are the numbers for Kevin Willard's team. They are shooting 41%. There are 362 teams in college basketball Division I. They are 275 out of 362. 275. That's the upside of their shooting. Their three-point shooting, and their three-point shooting is a big part of basketball right now. It's how the game is played. It's how the floor is spread. And if you don't have three-point shooting, you're really in big trouble. And they are in big trouble. They are shooting 22% from three. 22%. That's 40 of 176. Again, there are 362 teams. They are 359. There are only 3 teams in the United States of America that are worse at shooting the three than Maryland. That's hard to believe. That's incredibly hard to believe. So this is Willard yesterday at his news conference asked, how do you fix this?
I mean, I went to church, so I'll see if that helps. No, I mean, our numbers are scary. But I think a lot of it is, Deshaun's taking 21 threes, Jamie's taking 28 threes. Guys I thought who were going to take some big jumps haven't really taken jumps. I think as Deshaun and Jamie get more comfortable in what shot to shoot, when to shoot, get comfortable playing on the road in environments that they've never seen, I think their numbers are going to go up dramatically. And if their numbers go up just 10 percentage points, which they can do very easily, then I think our numbers will go up much easier. Right now, everyone's just packing it in, making it hard for us to get it to Juju, making it hard on Ju. But again, I think Jameer needs, Jameer's gotten some good looks and he's missed some shots where I have a lot of confidence in him shooting it. Dante's got to do a better job of trying to find some shots and getting more shots for him. So I do think the numbers are going to go up as soon as these guys get a little bit more comfortable. And playing at Nova, playing at Indiana as your first two true road games are tough to do. And I think these guys they're starting to get it. They're starting to understand. I have great confidence in them. So I haven't told them not to shoot. I'm not going to tell them not to shoot. Eventually it's going to click, and when it does, it's going to help us all.
I mean, just a little bit better would be a huge improvement. 22%. And what he's saying about Julian Reese, yeah, that's a problem because they're packing it in the paint, and it means when he gets the ball at the top of the key, which is where he usually gets it, he tries to back down and get his shot close to the basket, and somebody's generally stripping it away from him, or if the team is big enough, they got a couple of big men to face him. And by the way, how about this? There is a big man tonight who's playing pretty well for Penn State, and you know the name. Qudus Wahab. Qudus Wahab started at Georgetown. Okay, played 2 years at Georgetown. He was a key player on that miracle run that they made to the NCAA tournament in 2021 when they had the COVID year and nobody's allowed to go to the games. And they didn't have a very good regular season, but they won the Big East tournament. And Georgetown got in. That's the one time they got in with Patrick Ewing. Then he left, and he went to Maryland for a year. And then he went back to Georgetown. He was back at Georgetown last year. And because the COVID year didn't count, he's got a fifth year of eligibility, and he's playing for Penn State. So he's now, all this moving back and forth locally, he's now moved a little bit west and is at his third school over 5 years. And one of the schools he was at twice. He's doing okay for Penn State. He's averaging 11 points and 9 rebounds a game. And he might be, I guess, he's faced Julian Reese in practice before, and I guess Maryland and Georgetown didn't play last year, right? So that wouldn't have happened. But when Reese was a freshman, they must have played against each other, so they're going to see him again tonight. This is more from Kevin Willard, and it's about where they are at this point in the season. Big Ten play has already started. They've played 8 games. You only play 30, whatever it is. And, you got a question right now. A team that shoots this badly, is this who they really are? Is this the identity of the team?
I think it's a really good question, because I think we are a little bit of who we are right now. Defensively, we're pretty much who we're going to be, but I think offensively, this team's has so much more room to grow. I just think, I used the analogy the other night, we're playing 2 freshmen a lot of minutes, and they are playing really good, but they're not even scratching the potential of where they're going to be in February. It's like, they're like freshmen in high school again, and they just got to figure it out and learn what it's like to play consistently in big-time basketball. So I think as Deshaun gets a little bit more comfortable, Jamie gets a little bit more comfortable, I think those guys are going to have a huge effect on how we play offensively. So I think it's a legitimate question. How much better do I think we can get? A lot. I don't know how much better we can get defensively. I think we're going to be who we are defensively right now.
Oh, okay. But they can't get any worse shooting the ball, can they? 275 of 362 teams in the country from the field and from three. 359 out of 362, 22%. One other local college basketball note here. I watched last night most of the game, and it turned out to be a hell of a game. George Washington playing against Navy, and they had a pretty good crowd there at the Smith Center, which is really a hidden gem for college basketball in this area. It's a beautiful arena. It's probably 40 years old, maybe 50 years old, but it's really a good place to watch a basketball game. And Navy with Ed DeChellis hung in there. They were down by 12 with about 6 minutes to go. They sent the game to overtime, mainly because George Washington couldn't hit a free throw. They missed 15 free throws, I think 18 to 33. I mean, that's unbelievable. But good for George Washington for finding a way to win the game. And I love it when local teams play. That doesn't happen often enough. One thing that Willard said this year going into the season, that he and Ed Cooley, the new coach at Georgetown, have agreed. They're friends. They coached against each other in the Big East, that we're going to have an annual game between Georgetown and Maryland, which is going to be great. But at a slightly lower level, Navy and George Washington, entertaining to watch last night, and I'm sure that GW will be working on its free throws. It's a home game, so it wasn't a foreign court. This is the baskets they shoot at every day, but they couldn't hit free throws last night, and that's why the game went to overtime, but they were tough enough to pull it out. They had I forget the name of the player, but he set a record last night with 11 block shots, a record that goes back to 1976. He had 11 blocks in the game. That's something. And Navy, Navy's going to be tough. And they were tough last night, and good for them for hanging in the game. All right, coming up, Mike Rizzo talking at the winter meetings yesterday, what he said about Steven Strasburg and more. Stay with us. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
We got Tony coming up at 11 o'clock. 50 years ago today, the Padres were on their way to D.C., and then didn't happen. We'll get to that shortly. Mike Rizzo talking at the baseball winter meetings yesterday. I'll go through his comments here just a second. A couple of other baseball-related stories. Well, they are baseball stories. Craig Kimbrell, according to The Athletic, is on his way to Baltimore. That Felix Bautista is going to miss miss all of next season after Tommy John surgery. He was the American League Closer of the Year. So Kimbrell would take his place as the closer with the Orioles, this being reported by Ken Rosenthal of The Athletics. They also had yesterday the 2024 draft lottery to determine who will be picking first. Used to be just the worst record got the first pick, and there was a lot of tanking going on in baseball, so I put an end to that. They went to a lottery. And this is similar to the NBA, where it's a weighted lottery, so the worst three teams had an 18% chance of getting the number one pick, but that's not what happened. Number one pick went to the Cleveland Guardians, who had just a 2% chance of picking number one in the draft. And Cleveland, they've had a history of being really bad, and the draft goes back to 1965. Cleveland has selected number two 5 times, and that's 5 times earning it as, I guess, the second worst team. But they've never picked number one. The last time they were picking number two was 1992, so that's 31 years ago. They took Paul Shuey with the second pick. So they're going to be picking number one in the draft. And here's the way it worked for the Nationals. Even though they had the 5th worst record in baseball this year, an improvement from the year before, but they had only 71 wins, and would have been in the 5 slot with those percentages, they were ineligible for the draft lottery because they're over the salary cap. And you say, well, wait a minute. What I know about the Strasburg contract. Do you know that Max Scherzer is the 3rd highest paid player on the Nationals? Because he's still getting, I think it's $7 million a year from that deferred money, and that counts towards the luxury tax. So they're over the luxury tax threshold, and so they are ineligible. Well, it's ineligible, I should say, 2 years in a row. Like last year, they had the 2nd pick in the draft. They were in the lottery. They could have gotten number one, but they took Dylan Cruz, the outfielder from LSU, who they expect to be a big power hitter for them, and maybe he comes up this year, or maybe at the end of the year or next year, 2025. But they expect him to be a big contributor, corner outfielder for them, and they're not in that this year. So they're going to pick 10. Who knows what you come up with 10. I think Mike Trout was number 10 when he was taken. So we could have them have a terrific player there. But as far as getting the number one or getting the draft pick that they would get based on what they earned on the field, that's not the way that works. So it's Cleveland number 1, Cincinnati Reds number 2, Rockies, Athletics, and White Sox 3, 4, and 5. That's how they stack up for the draft. And the Nats, who conceivably could have been 5 or higher, they're going to go at number 10. Also yesterday, with as we wait to see where the free agents go, and Shohei Ohtani, the big fish, where's he going to land? Where's he going to go? The thinking from most of the baseball people, like Tim Kurkjian, are that he's going to wind up with the Dodgers, that he doesn't want to leave the West Coast. The Dodgers have been not spending very much on free agents lately. They're saving their money, saving their shekels so they can sign them. And Dave Roberts, who's won a World Series, and they like him, good manager, but loose lips sink ships. And the reports are that Ohtani wanted to keep this low key. He didn't want this out there. So Roberts was talking to the media yesterday, and he said that the conversations that they had a few days ago with Ohtani, quote, went well. Shortly after the press conference wrapped up, Dodgers general manager Brandon Gomes said he was surprised that he mentioned the meeting with Ohtani. Roberts' comments came as a surprise due to Ohtani's reported preference to keep his free agent meetings quiet. Jeff Passan has reported that. So he said if visits between Ohtani and a team are reported publicly, it will be held against the team. So the circles will be tiny and tight. So if the Dodgers are out of it because the manager had loose lips, the others are reportedly in contention: Giants, Angels, Blue Jays, and Cubs. And given that he's going to be a designated hitter last year, solely a designated hitter, that may factor into who signs him, even though it's going to be a multi-year contract. And eventually the hope is he gets back and he pitches again. He's a two-way player, which increases his value even more. But you got both American League and National League teams involved, which wouldn't have happened, I guess, 3 or 4 years ago when we still had the DH only in the American League and the National League didn't have it. So there's that. Mike Rizzo on, it's funny when a general manager is at a winter meeting, sometimes they get pats on the back for what they did. Mike Elias certainly getting that with the Orioles. Brandon Hyde, the manager. The Nationals were a better team in 2022 than a better team in 2023 than they were in 2022. They made a 16-game improvement from 55 wins to 71 wins. And Mike Rizzo's not really a wisecracker, but he decided that, getting a pat on the back, after winning a World Series in 2019 for 71 wins is not something that he's going to glow about.
Well, the key to that was we won so few games the year before. I mean, that was really the key to it. I mean, we're not proud of 71 wins, believe me. It was a step forward. More importantly, the young players made progress. I wasn't trying to be smart aleck when I say that. It was, our goal is never to win 71 games. Our goal is to win a division, win world championships, and we think that I feel that we took a step in the right direction last year doing that, and we're going to try and facilitate another roster that allows us to take another step forward and get into the action with a terrific division that we have to deal with. So we understand the challenges in front of us, and I think we're a capable group, and I think you've seen in the past that we've done, and I think that we're going to be able to do it in the future.
Now, there's only one position player left from the World Series team of 2019. And it's hard to believe he's only 26, but that's Victor Robles. And he's going to go off and play winter ball. He had a lot of injuries last year and was limited to 36 games. Though in those 36 games, he hit pretty well. He hit .299. That's not a large enough sample size, only 36 games. But given what had happened to him after the World Series year, where he played in 155 games, was tremendous defensively, hit .255 with 17 home runs, stole 28 bases. I mean, he was a key key player in that run to the World Series, playing center field. Then his defense dropped off as we moved into the pandemic year of 2020, played 52 games, hit only 220 for the year. Then in 2021, playing 107 games, he really bottomed out. He hit 203 with only 2 homers. 2022 picked up a little bit. He played 132 games, hit 224 with 6 home runs, and then limited role last year. And what Rizzo is hoping for is a big bounce-back year. But in reality, you're talking about a season that was, 4 years ago. Is he able to do it? But Rizzo does have high hopes.
Be healthy and be Victor. Be Victor of 2019 when he was a rookie playing with his hair on fire, and he was a pretty damn good player. We know it's in there, and we're waiting for it to resurface. And a healthy Victor playing like he played in 2019 is an asset to the team. He's an elite defensive guy. He showed some power. He showed he's capable of stealing a base. So to get him back to where he was is important for him.
And again, those numbers: 155 games, hit 255, 17 home runs, 28 steals. Yeah, he gives him a year like that, and I guess. I don't know what the exact situation is with his contract. He avoided arbitration this year by taking slightly less. Is he eligible for free agency after this year? I'm not sure. It might be 2 more years. But, yeah, if he has a bounce-back year like that, that's huge. And at 26, that's a guy you can count on for a while. Last thing from Rizzo, and this is the thing that they're kind of carrying around right now, which they'd like to unload. Remember during the season, might have been in September, that there was reports that there was going to be a news conference that Steven Strasburg was officially retiring and that there would be a day for him and that they would retire his number and it would be all hunky-dory, nice send-off. And then there's no news conference. There is no send-off. And word gets out, he's not walking away from all that money. That's over $100 million left on his contract, and we're just not going to leave that behind. If you would like to release him, we can do that, and he still gets all the money. But we're just not going to, give you a concession like that and just walk away from cash, and that made it not happen. So, and then it was like, Rizzo was saying, well, he's on the roster, and we'll see him in spring training. So it got really ticklish there, and it still is right now, and it's unresolved. But now the tack that Rizzo seems to be taking here is, okay, I've dealt with this. I'm now rinsing my hands of this. Not that we don't love Strasburg, but this is not under my purview right now. Sounds like this is something that has to be worked out between ownership, Players Association, and Uber agent Scott Boras.
I don't want to get into the Strasburg situation. Is it unfortunate that he's taken up a roster spot? Yeah, it's unfortunate. But these things are above your and my pay grade. So we're gonna let the Players Association and Major League Baseball sort this thing out. And the bottom line is Steven Strasburg's one of ours. He's a pillar of the organization. His name is going to be in the Ring of Honor someday, and I love the guy. So that's where I leave it.
And I don't think it's over. This will spill into spring training. Strasburg won't be there. He's never going to pitch again. And I think that what will happen is there will be a news conference to open up spring training. Davey Martinez will be asked about it. He'll say, I don't really have any information. He's not here. When he shows up, I'll tell you. And Rizzo will say just what he said there. This is something to be worked out between the Players Association and ownership, and it's not for me. So there we are. It shouldn't end like this. It really shouldn't. And I hope that they can get this resolved, because I think they're supposed to have, during the season, maybe even opening day, a celebration of the 5th anniversary of the World Championship. That's still a big deal. I know the last few seasons haven't gone like they hoped, but for people of my age who went 33 years without baseball and going back to the last World Championship before that, which was in 1924, long before I was born and even my father was born, it's still a big deal, and it'd be nice to have the MVP of that World Series there to celebrate it with his former teammates as we look back on the greatest moment in recent D.C. baseball history. I know that those from the 1920s might argue, but recently that's the biggest moment. Tony's coming up at 11 o'clock. Up next, 50 years ago today, the San Diego Padres were a done deal to move to D.C. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Tony at 11 o'clock. 50 years ago today, the National League owners in baseball voted unanimously to allow the San Diego Padres to be sold to Joseph Danzansky, who owned Giant Food, and have the team move to Washington in time for the 1974 season. We'd only been without baseball for 2 years. The Senators left after the 1971 season, so we had 72 and 73 without baseball. And it looked like a done deal. It looked like, okay, all right, 2-year wait, and we get a new team. Boom, National League. And there was even some discussion as the Senators were getting ready to leave at the end of the 71 season that a National League team was coming. So this all fit in. There's a terrific story that was written at MLB.com by Anthony Kastrovitz, which was 2 years ago. You can look this up online, who lays out what happened here, how it happened, and why it didn't happen. He says it goes back to the approval of the A's and their move from Kansas City to Oakland in 1967. At the time, the American League, looking to appease Missouri Senator Stuart Symington, cemented plans to add 2 new teams in Kansas City and Seattle. And although the 2 leagues operated somewhat independently in those days, the AL's expansion forced the hand of the National League, and they voted to also increase by 2. So Montreal was chosen quickly, unanimously, and then it came down to the other teams and the other team, and 9 initial votes went for Buffalo, but they wanted to put another team on the West Coast. The Giants were very much in favor of having another team so they wouldn't, have to travel as much, travel to Buffalo. So they came up with an ownership group led by C. Arnholt Smith and former Dodgers general manager Buzzy Bavasi. So they got the team, and they launched in 1969 as baseball expanded by 4 teams. Well, the Padres were terrible. They were really bad on the field. They had a .367 winning percentage over their first 4 years, and they were losing money with an owner who was a crook. Arnold Smith had paid $10 million in the expansion fee to start the team, but he wasn't willing to spend money because he didn't have it. And so you had that going. Plus, as Bavasi said later on, he was a crook and a convicted felon who siphoned off the ball club's homestand ticket deposits. So he was a thief, and he would indeed be convicted in May of 1979 on a felony count of grand theft for stealing $8.9 million from his securities company, Sovereign State Capital. He would serve only 8 months of a 1-year sentence. And earlier in the 70s, the United States National Bank, which Smith owned, suffered what was at the time the largest bank failure in history due to excessive loans that Smith to his own companies. The bank went under, so did the pension plans of Padres employees. So this was a real mess. And it was revealed on May 5th, 1973, that the Internal Revenue Service was after C. Arnold Smith for $23 million in unpaid taxes. They were averaging only $7,000 a game. And at that point, he decided, okay, late May, he's going to put the team up for sale. And he had a buyer, Joseph Danzansky, the president of Giant Food. This was a done deal. And he was going to sell the team for a then record price of $12 million, which was $2 million more than what George Steinbrenner had paid to buy the Yankees just a few months earlier. So Danzansky was paying $12 million to get the Padres, and the Yankees had been sold for $10 million just a few months earlier, but that was the cost of doing business. The Danzansky deal was contingent, though, upon the resolution of legal issues. The team was in its 5th season of a 20-year stadium lease with the city of San Diego and had commitments to various vendors. So they're going to have to get out of that. And the city was gearing up for a massive breach of contract lawsuit against the team and the National League. So while Danzansky and investors may have been able to scrape together the money, could they fend off a lawsuit like that? So that was looming there. But on this day in 1973, the other 11 National League owners, there were only 12 teams in the National League in those days, the other 11 owners with a 1974 schedule drawn up for Washington, they approved the sale of the team. And Ironically, opening day at RFK in 1974 would have been against the Philadelphia Phillies on April the 4th. Years later, the Washington Nationals played their first game against the Phillies. It was in Philadelphia, but ironically, it was against the Phillies. But this was moving straight ahead, and even President Nixon at the time said, "I want to just cast my vote in favor of returning Major League Baseball to the nation's capital." He said, and this was just before the Saturday Night Massacre, where he fired everybody, and it led eventually to him resigning from office in August of 1974. Now, they even had names. They're coming up with names. One of them was the Pandas, because we had just gotten pandas at the National Zoo from China. Another name was Nationals. They did consider Nationals. They didn't know whether that would fly, but they thought, well, we used to call them both the Nationals and the Senators, and eventually they became known as the Senators. Why not the Nationals? They also had Stars as a possible name, and they even went as far as, you've probably heard about this, Topps baseball cards came out with 15 Padres on them, and it said Washington at the top and NATLEA at the bottom. In other words, Washington National League. In the space that you would have the team name, since they didn't have one, it was just going to be Washington National League. It featured, among others, Clarence Gaston, Cito Gaston, who later managed the Blue Jays, Dave Roberts, Willie McCovey, Randy Jones, who was a great pitcher, Nate Colbert, big power hitter. Oh, boy, National League guys coming to Washington. Isn't this going to be cool? And then from the time, though, that the sale agreement was made through the conclusion of the 73 season, Dan Zansky was given leeway to approve or reject player transactions. Apparently, he gave the go-ahead to Dave Winfield. Dave Winfield was a great player, I guess, because of Joseph Dan Zansky. Dan Zansky's plan was to get Frank Robinson, who was then playing for the Angels, as his player manager, which would have made Robinson the first black manager in Major League history. Would have been for the 74 season. As it was, he became the first black manager in 1975 when he was in Cleveland. They even went as far as to have Peter Vivasi, the general manager, come to Washington to work with Dan Zansky on the transition process. And Vivasi, coming from San Diego, hadn't packed properly and just had a raincoat. So Dan Zansky lent him his camel hair top coat. When Vivasi returned to California after a 2-week stay, he shipped the coat back with a note of thanks. Dan Zansky sent it back. "Please keep this coat," he wrote. "I have every confidence you will need it someday when you come back east." So everything is hunky-dory. They got a deal with Dan Zansky. They got approval from major league owners to move the team. You've got Vivasi with a camel hair coat to come back to chilly Washington. It is so great. And then things begin to change. Late 1973, the city of San Diego threatened to sue the Padres for $84 million for breaking the lease and other damages. And when they had voted to approve the sale on this day in 1973, San Diego Mayor Pete Wilson responded, "We'll see you in court." It never got to that point. Dan Zansky lined up insurers to protect himself and the league against the lawsuit, but the arrangement required Smith to pay, C. Arnold Smith, the owner, to pay the steep premiums, and he didn't have the money to do that, so that wasn't going to happen. So now they don't have an owner, and it's not going to happen in Washington because of this lawsuit. They had no television or radio deals put in place. They even had to ask for a $71,000 advance from the city of San Diego to prevent 10 of their players from becoming free agents. Wow, there wasn't even free agency in baseball then. Here was the White Knight, Ray Kroc, who was the McDonald's magnate. He was sitting on his yacht off the coast of Fort Lauderdale, and he read in the newspaper about what was going on. And he decides that he's going to buy the team. And here's how quickly it went. He got on hold of C. Arnold Smith. A lunch was arranged. Kroc said, "How much do you want for the team?" Smith said, $12 million. He said, "Done, deal." And they shook hands. Then, this is great. Then Ray Kroc has to pick up his wife, Joan, at the airport after the deal is made. Here's what Joan recalls about what happened.
I was in Chicago, and the plan was to meet Ray in Los Angeles. And I had a lovely flight out and got off the plane, and Ray was there and thrilled and excited and jumping around. And he said, "Honey, guess what? We've just bought the Padres." And I said, the Padres? Well, what is that, a religious institution? I thought it was a monastery, I swear. And he said, no, it's a baseball team. And I said, Ray, are you crazy?
She thought it was a monastery. It was a baseball team. And any worries that people in San Diego had about the Padres moving, Croc at the news conference said, no way.
If I own it 100%. So nobody else can speak for me. And I can tell you this, the San Diego Padres are going to stay the San Diego Padres.
Yep, and they did. And there was, some hope still. We're going to get baseball. We wandered in the desert for the next 31 years. 1975, Bowie Kuhn, the commissioner, had a plan in which every major league team would play 2 home games at RFK Stadium. That never got off the ground. Then the various rounds of expansion starting in 1977 with teams going to Seattle and Toronto. We didn't get a team there. And, Dan Zansky passed away in 1979, so he was no longer a bidder. And it finally happened 31 years later. In the fall of 2004, it was announced that the Montreal Expos were moving here, ironically with Frank Robinson, who Dan Zansky wanted to be his manager. Robinson was the manager of that team. And, again, they played their first game as the Washington Nationals against the Philadelphia Phillies, which they would have played in 1974, 31 years earlier, had the Padres come here. Wow, what a story, and very well told in this MLB.com piece from a couple of years ago. All right, that wraps it up for me. I'll be back tomorrow. We're going to do some Army-Navy talk with Scott Wyckoff, who does the pre- and post-game for Navy. They're playing this year in Foxborough, usually in Philadelphia. Foxborough this year, FedEx Field next year. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Tony is coming up next, and I will see you back here tomorrow at 9 a.m.